December 14th, 1944. A German engineering officer named Major Friedrich Weber stands in a frozen forest in eastern Belgium, staring at a bridge over the Meuse River near the town of Ardennes. He holds a set of engineering plans in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. He measures the bridge width. Then he measures it again. Then a third time. The bridge is 3.2 meters wide. The plans say it should be 6.5 meters wide. Weber's hands start shaking, not from the cold, from the realization of what this means. In 48 hours, the largest German offensive since 1940 will begin. Over 200,000 German soldiers, 1,004 tanks and assault guns, and thousands of supply trucks are about to pour through these forests, racing toward this bridge and dozens like it. The entire operation, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, depends on German armored columns reaching the Meuse River, crossing these bridges, and driving northwest to capture the Belgian port of Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in half and forcing a negotiated peace. But if the bridges are too narrow for German tanks, the offensive will stall. The timetable will collapse. The fuel will run out, and 200,000 men will be trapped in a frozen forest with the entire Allied Air Force bearing down on them. Weber rushes back to headquarters. He reports the discrepancy. His superior, General Major Hans Krebs, stares at him. "Are you certain?" Weber nods. Krebs pulls out the operational map. The bridge widths were calculated using French and Belgian civil engineering surveys from the 1930s. But those surveys measured the roadway width, not the actual usable width between the bridge railings. The difference? 3 meters. Krebs closes the folder. He knows what this means. But the attack is already set in motion. Adolf Hitler has personally approved the plan. The troops are in position. The fuel depots have been established. There is no time to revise the offensive. They will have to proceed and hope the discrepancy does not matter. It mattered. Within 72 hours, the 3-meter miscalculation would contribute to one of the most catastrophic logistical collapses in military history. And the story of how one measurement error compounded into strategic disaster reveals something fundamental about the limits of planning, the fragility of complex operation, and the razor-thin margins that separate victory from annihilation in modern warfare. Let me show you exactly how 3 meters destroyed Adolf Hitler's final gamble. The plan for Wacht am Rhein was audacious, desperate even. By December 1944, Germany was losing the war on every front. The Soviets were advancing from the east. The Western Allies had liberated France and were preparing to cross the Rhine into Germany itself. German cities were being bombed into rubble. Fuel was scarce. Manpower was running out. The war was clearly lost. But Adolf Hitler refused to accept defeat. He believed, genuinely believed, that one massive surprise offensive could split the Allies, capture their supply depots, destroy their will to fight, and force a negotiated armistice. He looked at a map of the Western Front and identified the weakest point. The Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, the same route Germany had used in 1940 to stunning effect. The plan was to concentrate 3 German armies, over 200,000 men, in total secrecy, then launch a surprise attack through the Ardennes, break through the thinly defended American lines, race 125 miles northwest to Antwerp, and cut off the British and Canadian armies in the north from the American armies in the south. The operation had to be fast. The plan gave German forces 7 days to reach Antwerp before Allied reinforcements could arrive. Speed was everything, and speed depended on roads, bridges, and logistics. Here is where the plan started to unravel before it even began. The Ardennes is not ideal tank country. It is heavily forested, hilly, and laced with narrow roads and small rivers. There are only a handful of paved roads capable of supporting heavy armor. Every one of those roads had choke points, villages, forests, river crossings. The German planners knew this. They built the entire offensive timeline around the assumption that German armored spearheads, the Kampfgruppen, would move fast enough to capture key bridges intact, before American engineers could blow them up. The planning documents are meticulous. Every bridge was mapped. Every road was assigned. Fuel consumption was calculated down to the liter. The Germans even planned to capture American fuel depots to supplement their own limited supplies. It was a logistical masterpiece on paper, but it had a fatal flaw. The bridge measurements were wrong. Let me explain why this mattered so much. The German offensive relied heavily on heavy tanks and assault guns, Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers. These were not small vehicles. A Panther tank was 3.4 meters wide. A Tiger II, the King Tiger, was 3.75 meters wide. Add the width needed for crew hatches, antennas, and track clearance, and you needed a minimum roadway width of 4 meters for a single tank to cross a bridge safely. If the bridge had railings, walls, or barriers, you needed even more clearance. The German engineers calculated that the bridges in the Ardennes region, based on Belgian civil engineering records, averaged 6 to 7 meters wide. That would allow a single tank to cross with clearance, or 2 smaller vehicles side by side. Tight but workable. But the actual bridges, the ones the tanks would have to cross, were not 6 to 7 meters wide. Many were 4 to 5 meters. Some, like the bridge Weber measured, were barely 3 meters. The surveys had measured the road approaches, not the bridge decks themselves. Or they had measured older, wider bridges that had since been replaced with narrower structures. Or the measurements were just wrong. No one caught the error because no one physically verified the measurements. The Germans were planning an offensive in enemy-occupied territory. They could not send engineers to measure every bridge without revealing their intentions. So they relied on pre-war surveys and assumed the data was accurate. It was not. December 16, 1944. 5:30 a.m. The offensive begins. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces open fire along an 80-mile front. American positions are obliterated. Entire units are overrun, surrounded, or forced to retreat in chaos. German infantry and armored columns pour through the gaps, driving west. In the first 24 hours, the Germans advance up to 15 miles in some sectors. The Americans are stunned. They had no idea an offensive of this scale was coming. But within the first day, the logistical problems begin. German armored spearheads, racing toward the Meuse River, hit their first major obstacle, the town of St. Avold and its bridge over the Amblève River. The lead unit, Kampfgruppe Peiper, commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, arrives at the bridge at 8 a.m. on December 17th. The bridge is intact. The Americans have not blown it yet. Peiper orders his lead Panther tank across. The tank approaches the bridge. The driver slows. The bridge is narrow, very narrow. The tank edges forward. The tracks are less than 30 centimeters from the bridge railing on each side. The driver advances slowly, carefully. It takes 4 minutes for the tank to cross a 40-meter bridges. Behind that tank, there are 72 more tanks and assault guns waiting to cross. At 4 minutes per vehicle, that is nearly 5 hours just to get the armor across. Peiper realizes the problem immediately. He cannot afford 5 hours. The Americans are regrouping. Allied aircraft will be overhead as soon as the weather clears. He needs to move. He orders his engineers to remove the bridge railings to create more clearance. They do. It helps, slightly. The crossing time per tank drops to 3 minutes, still too slow. And this is just one bridge. Across the entire offensive, German armored units are facing the same problem. Bridges that were supposed to allow rapid crossings are creating bottlenecks. Tanks are stuck waiting. Infantry is moving ahead of the armor. Fuel trucks cannot keep up. The entire offensive timetable, which assumed German spearheads would advance 30 to 40 miles per day, is already behind schedule. But it gets worse, much worse. On December 17th, an American engineer unit, the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, realizes that German armored columns are advancing faster than expected. They retreat to a key bridge near the town of Malmedy and prepare to demolish it. But German forces arrive before the charges are fully set. There is a brief firefight. The American engineers blow the bridge anyway, but the demolition is hasty and incomplete. The bridge partially collapses, but the structure remains partially intact. Piper's engineers assess the damage. They determine that with reinforcement, the bridge can support light vehicles and possibly medium tanks, but not heavy tanks like the King Tiger. Piper makes a decision. He leaves his heavy armor behind and pushes forward with lighter, faster vehicles. He is trying to maintain speed, but now his force is split. His heavy tanks, the backbone of his offensive power, are stuck on the east side of the river. His lighter forces are on the west side, advancing without heavy support. The cohesion of the Kampfgruppe is breaking down, and the fuel situation is getting critical. The German offensive plan assumed that Kampfgruppe Piper would capture American fuel depots within 48 hours. They had only enough fuel for 100 kilometers of combat operation. After that, they needed to refuel from captured stocks, but the American fuel depots Piper was supposed to capture had been evacuated or destroyed. The Americans, realizing the danger, pulled back their supplies. Piper's tanks were running on fumes. By December 19th, 3 days into the offensive, Piper's spearhead had advanced 40 miles, the deepest penetration of the entire offensive. But they were out of fuel. Completely out. Piper radioed headquarters. "Send fuel immediately. We are immobilized." Headquarters responded that fuel convoys were stuck in traffic 20 after Christ miles to the rear, unable to get through because the narrow roads and damaged bridges had created massive bottlenecks. Thousands of vehicles were gridlocked in the Ardennes forests. Piper's response, according to radio intercepts, was unprintable. Let me show you what the 3-meter miscalculation looked like from the air. On December 23, 1944, the weather cleared. For the first time in a week, Allied aircraft could fly. American P-47 Thunderbolts and British Typhoons launched hundreds of sorties over the Ardennes. Their primary targets: German supply columns stuck in traffic. The pilots reported the same thing. Miles and miles of German vehicles, bumper to bumper, unable to move. Tanks waiting at bridges. Fuel trucks stuck behind infantry columns. Supply convoys trapped in forests. The roads were clogged, and every vehicle was a target. The Allied aircraft strafed and bombed the columns relentlessly. Hundreds of German vehicles were destroyed. Fuel trucks exploded. Ammunition carriers detonated. The logistical spine of the offensive was shattered. And why were the vehicles stuck? Because the bridges could not handle the traffic volume, because the roads were too narrow, because the 3-meter miscalculation had cascaded into a traffic jam of historic proportions. Here are the numbers that tell the story. On December 16th, the first day of the offensive, German forces advanced an average of 12 miles. On December 17th, 8 miles. On December 18th, 5 miles. On December 19th, 2 miles. On December 19th. By December 20th, the offensive had stalled. Not because the Germans ran out of soldiers, not because American resistance was too strong, but because the Germans could not move their supplies forward fast enough to sustain the attackers. By December 24th, 8 days into the offensive, German spearheads were still 40 miles short of the Meuse River. They were out of fuel, out of ammunition, and under constant air attack. American reinforcements, including the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, had stabilized the front. The offensive was over. By January 1945, the Germans had been pushed back to their starting positions. They had lost over 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and thousands of vehicles. The Americans suffered heavily too, with over 80,000 casualties. But they could replace their losses. Germany could not. Now let's talk about the broader implications. The 3-meter miscalculation was not the only reason the Ardennes offensive failed. There were many factors: fuel shortages, Allied air superiority, stubborn American resistance, Hitler's refusal to adjust the plan, and German overconfidence. But the bridge miscalculation exemplifies a fundamental truth about military operations. Complex plans are fragile. Small errors compound. Assumptions kill. The Germans assumed the pre-war surveys were accurate. They were not. They assumed they could capture American fuel depots. They could not. They assumed the weather would stay bad long enough to ground Allied aircraft. It did not. Each assumption, when it failed, cascaded into the next failure, and the entire operation collapsed. Here is what Major Weber, the engineer who discovered the bridge discrepancy, wrote in his post-war memoir. "We built a perfect plan on imperfect information. Every calculation was precise. Every timetable was exact. But the foundation, the raw data we used, was flawed, and no amount of precision in planning can compensate for flawed data. I knew on December 14th that the offensive would fail. I just did not know how fast." The Battle of the Bulge, as the Americans called it, was Germany's last major offensive of the war. It consumed the last reserves of German fuel, armor, and veteran troops. After the Bulge, Germany had no strategic offensive capability left. The Allies crossed the Rhine in March 1945. Berlin fell in May. The war in Europe was over, and it all began to collapse when an engineer measured a bridge and found it was 3 meters narrower than the plan said it should be. So here is my question for you. In an age of satellite imaging, GPS, and real-time reconnaissance, could a miscalculation like this happen today? Or are modern militaries so dependent on technology that a single data error could be even more catastrophic? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I want to see what you think. If this story changed how you understand the Battle of the Bulge and the fragility of military planning, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals the small details that determined the outcomes of the biggest battles in history. Thanks for watching.